So I'm going to go through 10 quick steps here that talk about how to define a digital strategy, knowing that there's a lot of risk, knowing that failure rates are high, and knowing that there's no secrets, there's no secrecy or luck involved with success versus failure. They're very common patterns, and these are extremely common. In fact, you can always look at these expert witness cases, these extreme expert witness cases, and it's always amazing to me how these massive failures look so similar. They made so many of the same mistakes, and just on an extreme level. And that's why when we define our strategy, we need to do so in a way that doesn't get rid of the risk, but it recognizes that there is risks, there's trade-offs, there's pros and cons, there's no perfect answer. But guess what? We're going to create a strategy and a roadmap that gets us on the same page and fits us as a business, and isn't going to create that level of misalignment internally. So the first thing is to articulate an organizational strategy. And I included some screenshots. We'll share these slides with you, but there's screenshots you can see that it's really hard to read from where you're at right now. But one of the things we like to do is sort of a visual exercise with executives. When we do these executive strategy sessions, we'll do visual exercises where we try to understand a number of decision criteria and parameters for what the transformation is going to look like. And for one example that you'll see on here is common business processes, standardized business processes across the entire enterprise versus decentralized, independently operating companies. And there's a spectrum there, a continuum, right? You're not one or the other. You're probably somewhere in between. But we just try to understand, where are you guys right now? Let's talk about that first. And what's amazing is oftentimes, even when you're assessing yourself right now, we can't get the same answer. We have different opinions. Different parts of the business might have a different answer. And so you look at different functions and locations, and they all have different perceptions. But we do this with the leadership team to see how well aligned are they. And oftentimes, even just starting with current state, they're not aligned. They don't see the world the same way as far as where they are today. They don't self-assess themselves the same way. And then when you start to look at, well, what about the future? What should we be doing in the next 5 years? Do we want to standardize, or do we want to operate independently? Then you typically see an even broader variation in those responses. And we do this visually to show, like, hey, this is, we're starting at the top here. You guys are not on the same page. And guess what? That's trickling down the entire organization if you're not aligned up here. So let's start at the top and get that alignment on where we are today and where we're going. And by the way, let's also understand and make sure that we're clear on what it is we're actually trying to do. So if we say, for example, we are going to move from completely decentralized and independent autonomy over here, and we're moving to a model where we're completely standardized and acting like one common company, if we're making that big jump, we have to recognize that is a big jump. If that's what we want, great, but let's talk about the risk. Let's talk about the cost. Let's talk about the time. Let's talk about the value we get out of our investments in technology. It may be that we're too risk adverse. When we fully understand what it is we're really saying, it may be that we want to back off that expectation because we're just risk adverse, or we have never been successful with change in the past. So why would we now think that we're going to go through this big, massive change and somehow be successful overnight? So maybe we back that off and go for a more incremental, lower cost, potentially lower value, but lower risk approach. And I'm not saying either of these answers, by the way, are right or wrong. I honestly don't think there is a right answer. All I can say is if I look at a client and understand them, I can tell them what I think they're trying to do and what I think would make the most sense for them. But I don't believe in cookie cutter, one size fits all strategies. And that's the whole point of this presentation, is to talk about how can we navigate who we are and who we want to be, and how can we make decisions and get everyone on the team that's not here in this room right now, how can we get them all on the same page with the direction we're going? And so this is just an example of an exercise, and there's a lot of different criteria we can go through around decision making, and it's great for debate and discussion because, again, it's that love and logic mentality with executives where you have two options, let's just say, and there's no perfect one. I know you're looking for the silver bullet, but it doesn't exist. So let's make the decision that you're most comfortable with, knowing what the risks and the benefits are. And if we can do that and get everyone on the same page and understanding what the risks and the benefits are and comfortable with that, then we're a lot more likely to succeed, regardless of what the answer is. Again, I can't emphasize that enough. I think too often we look for that perfect strategy, that perfect business model, that perfect digital transformation strategy that's just gonna be magical for us. And that's not the case. What's more important is to say we made a decision. It may or may not be a perfect decision, but we are moving forward, all operating from the same hymn book, if you will. The other is to understand the current processes. A lot of times there's a mentality that, we're going through a transformation. We are implementing new technologies. We're very hyper-focused on the future state. So we don't care about the current state. And I understand why that might be the mentality for people going in, because if you think your processes are broken and inefficient, why would you want to focus too much time analyzing them? But the reality is there's probably a lot of good things you're doing that you're very good at, and we need to understand what those things are so that a digital transformation could actually build on that. And secondly, maybe even more importantly, your people understand the way things are today. They do not understand how things are going to be going forward, especially because we haven't even defined what it is going forward. So to relate the changes back to people and to help them through the change, we have to start with where they are today, meet them there, and then bringing them along. And if we don't take time to assess the current state and understand what the current state processes are, we're going to fail in that regard from a change management perspective. And by the way, we're probably going to defer too much to the technology and make it all about the technology rather than this is our business, this is how it should work, regardless of what technology we use. And so assessing current business processes is important. Now, of course, there's a fine line here. You don't want to overanalyze and just get stuck in analysis paralysis. We do not need to document every single workflow and granular micro business process within our business, but we do need to understand in general, how are things working, what are the differences between different departments and different locations, and we need to define where we're starting from, because that's going to help from a change perspective, as I mentioned, but it's also going to help us understand the magnitude of change. How big of a change does this really entail for our business, which will then drive how long it's going to take, which will then drive how much it costs, which will then drive, hopefully, realistic expectations. And by the way, if I had to pick a number 2 root cause for failure, I'd say it's unrealistic expectations. That'd be the one I would rank number 2. Companies that don't understand how long something is really going to take or what the risks really are, their failure rate is so much higher because they're forced into bad decisions. They have to cut back. They're trying to cram too much in too little time with too little money, and they just set themselves up for failure. So having realistic expectations is really important, and assessing your current state and knowing where you're starting from in your journey is a really important factor in accomplishing that. Just like you want to look at your business processes, you want to also understand and look at your organization. In the panel discussion we just had, we were talking about emerging technologies up here for those of you that weren't here. We talked about emerging technologies, and one of the things we talked about is how there's an organizational design component of change management. So when you look at something like AI that is completely transformative, potentially long-term, it's going to impact people's jobs very significantly. And we have to define how it's going to affect people's jobs. We don't want it just to happen organically. We want to define this is how we want to use AI to make our people better at what they do. And this is how their roles and responsibilities are going to change. If we're automating part of their job, what are we replacing that with? If we don't do that, people are going to be very confused. And speaking of confused, I'm not sure why the slides are doing that. I swear I'm not touching anything. If people are confused and if they don't understand and they're confused, they are going to assume the worst and they're going to push back on technology. So that's why we have to really make sure we evaluate where we are today, understand what the change impacts are to people, and also understand how we need to upskill people. How do we need to train them and teach them to be even better at what they do? We also want to look at current systems and architecture, and you can see a theme here. We're talking about looking at the current state, and you may think, well, let's just get on with it. Let's get on to the digital strategy part of it. But we have to start somewhere. We have to start and ground ourselves with where we are today. We've talked about people and processes. Now we talk about technology. What systems do we have today? How many gray market underground systems are out there that we don't even know about? How many spreadsheets are out there that no one knew existed except for that one person that's using them every day? Those are the types of things we need to dig up. It's almost like a treasure hunt of sorts to go find all these different systems that people are using. We had one client that they had counted up over 500 different systems they were using and applications throughout the organization, and at least half of those no one knew about until we took the time to go through this inventory of documenting them all. So that was pretty eye-opening to this client because they had no idea that all these different applications were spread out through the organization. Data was everywhere, and that's intellectual property. That's knowledge within your organization that it has been lost. And so being able to bring that all together and understand where all that stuff is really important to create a roadmap that not only is sure to bring along that technology and consider how that technology is going to fit into the long-term roadmap, but it's also just going to paint a clear vision of how we're going to decommission those systems potentially. What's the strategy? What's the plan to get off of some of these old systems and to replace these old systems with whatever you're replacing it with? And then performance measures. Here's where a lot of companies get stuck, and I think they gloss over this pretty significantly. Organizations will go into a project like this. They've been told that they need to go through a digital transformation, either because the vendor sunset the product, or their old system just isn't supported anymore, or it's a system that's broken and they can't scale the company anymore. So there's a lot of times there's a burning platform that we just have to do something. And how many of you are in that boat where you feel like you have to do something for whatever reason? Whether it's a good reason, bad reason, doesn't really matter, but you have a really compelling reason of why you're about to go through this. Does anyone have that? Okay, a few of you. Does anyone not have it? Let me ask you that. Does anyone just going through this and you're not quite sure why? You just were sent to this conference because you were told you had to be here? No? Okay, well, that's good. And if you could tell me afterwards if you're afraid to raise your hand there, I will not judge you, I promise. But the reason I bring that up is because a lot of times organizations don't feel like they need to really worry about measures or a business case. They think, well, why spend the time calculating ROI? We have to go through this project. Okay, let's just say that's true. Let's just say you have to go through the project because whatever the reason is. How do you know if you're going to declare success? Like, what is your definition of success? How are we going to measure and track how much time and effort and risk we're imposing on the organization? We can't do any of that unless we start to lay out performance metrics that are not just used as a business case justification tool, but are used to actually track benefits along the way. And it also creates a way for us to have project governance to where when we make decisions, such as, do we want to invest that extra time and money to buy that additional module, or to customize this piece of software over here, or to go buy this bolt-on over here, those decisions are really hard to make if you're not tying it back to metrics somehow. If we can't justify it by saying, well, this is actually going to help us reduce our inventory level materially more than we could with this other technology we're already using, so that's why we think we should invest extra time and money and impose more risk over here, then great, then it probably does make sense. But if you can't justify it, then you really have to ask yourself, well, why would we do it then? If we're going to invest all this time and money to customize or to buy this new software, but we can't point to any real measurable benefit, then why are we doing it? And those measures become really important because it helps you make decisions along the way in a way that's very aligned, and it sort of provides you a North Star to guide you along the way. And then here's where we look at comparing alternatives. And this is where, again, the love and logic theme comes in here with executives and decision-making throughout an organization, is looking at all the different options we have. I mean, you can see some examples up here on the left side, or I'm sorry, on the right side of your screen, things around your business process strategy that we talked about. Are we going to standardize? Are we going to decentralize? Somewhere in between? Is it a mix depending on what part of the business we're talking about? Do we want a single ERP system, or do we want best of breed? That's a big decision. And guess what? Neither in that example, both examples, there is no easy answer. Either side, either extreme you might choose is going to have trade-offs. They're going to have different benefits and different risks. And just because you eliminated some of the risks by making a different decision, that probably just means you just introduced new risk. You just replaced the risk that you had over here with these new risks over here. And so making those deliberate decisions that aren't overly optimistic and aren't filtered through rose-colored glasses is super important. And so being able to compare those alternatives and look objectively at all the different decisions we need to make in a transformation while we're planning for it is super important. And the more of this we can do up front, the more we get that alignment that I was talking about before, the more we have a realistic plan, because now we've actually traded off and understood what those trade-offs are, and we've made those deliberate decisions that we think is the best fit for us. Now suddenly we're driving that alignment to keep us all on the same page and go in the same direction, and having a strategy that just fits our overall business. And I think the other thing too, if I'm going to add one more thing here, I'd also say, when you're looking at your alternatives, it's so easy to think, well, everyone over here is talking about AI, and we haven't really built much AI into our overall strategy. If you got bigger fish to fry and you can't even close the books on a timely basis because your technology is so outdated, start there. Like, just start, get the basics in place, make some incremental changes. That's okay. I think there's a negative connotation sometimes with not keeping up with technology, and it creates this sort of stigma, this FOMO. I know Emma, who's back here, just did a video, and so I'm stealing this idea from her, but she's talking about FOMO and technology. And now I owe her royalties because I was hoping she wasn't in the room to hear me steal her idea. But so you take FOMO, people have this fear of missing out. They feel like, well, everyone else is implementing AI, or everyone else is doing advanced analytics or whatever. And that's not a good reason either. And it's okay to fall behind, or not fall behind, but not keep up with the vendors. And I think that's just what you have to recognize is you can start slow, you can speed up, you can make progress. And as long as you're moving forward at the pace that makes sense for you, then you're going to be in good shape. But you do want to make those comparisons and objective comparisons of alternatives for sure. And then once you've done all this stuff, then we define what that 3 to 5 year roadmap is. I wouldn't think much beyond 5 years. In fact, it's a stretch to really think at 3 years, quite frankly, the way things change. You just look at COVID and all the merger and acquisition activity, all the economic turmoil and wars and supply chain disruptions. There's so much happening in the world right now, it's really hard to plan even 3 years out. But knowing that 3 to 5 year plan may change, it's going to evolve, you might have to pivot along the way, but at least have something laid out that starts with all the stuff we've talked about so far, which is defining where we are today, where we're going, how we're going to get there, what risks we know we're taking on and how we're going to mitigate those risks, how this supports our overall strategy, how we're going to measure success, all that stuff you want to have laid out as part of your 3 to 5 year roadmap. And again, all this stuff I'm talking about, if you look at what most organizations do, they don't spend the time doing this. They end up come to a show like this, they get enamored by some technology, they go buy it, and then they try to figure out, okay, now let's back into how are we going to go implement this. And that's a really backwards way of doing it because you're likely to overinvest in technology you're never going to use anytime soon. You're likely to not have that alignment. You're likely not to understand where it is you're going. And so why waste all that time and money now when you could be spending some time getting this all figured out so that you make smarter decisions along the way? And then defining a business case and benefits realization plan. The one thing I'll just add to this, even though I sort of alluded to this point already, the one thing I would say is when you create a business case to take to your board or to your management team to justify the project, which hopefully you're doing, then you want to make sure you're not just being overly optimistic and putting in numbers that give you the answer you're looking for. You want to really look at how much could we really reduce our inventory or how much could we really speed up cycle times and how. By the way, how's the technology really going to help us do that? What else would we need besides just new technology to be able to do that? What kind of behavioral changes would we need to invest in? What kind of process changes would we have to make internally to drive that level of benefit? So really understanding how we're going to achieve benefits realization and tying it to the decisions that are made in the project is really important. And no one wants to do this, but if you can measure benefits after you've rolled out new changes, it's scary because you're going to find you didn't get the benefits you expected right away. That's normal. But if you don't measure it and you don't understand how you fell short, why you fell short, where you fell short, you're never going to achieve it. So my question to organizations is rather than just jumping ahead and moving quickly into phase 2 of the project or the next location of the rollout, why not spend a little bit of time there after you just spent however long, you spent all this time and money to get to that go live. Why not spend just a little bit of time optimizing and fine tuning that to where you're actually getting business value and you're maximizing that investment that you've already made. And guess what? By doing that, you're going to learn a lot of what you could do better in the next phase of the project. So you might as well just wait and get that right in the first phase and then move on to the next phase. So there's a lot of value in creating that benefits realization plan and thinking of things from more of an objective, measurable perspective. And then this is important too, defining your change management plan. It starts with how big of a change we're going to impose on the organization. If you think of it as a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being massive change, 1 being more of an incremental change, and obviously everything in between, you have to say, well, if we're at 9 out of 10, that implementation plan is going to look totally different for that exact organization if they were a 2 out of 10. And again, these are all deliberate decisions we're making. We've intentionally made the decision that yes, we're going to take on a big change, or no, we're not. But now we've got to make a plan, a change management plan for how we're going to get people to adapt to the software and how we're going to, the change strategies we're going to deploy to accommodate that. And the change management plan and people's ability to change is usually the critical path activity on a project plan. Usually you're going to implement technology and do all the technical stuff a lot faster than the people and the operations and the organization is able to change. So if we don't do this change management plan and don't understand what our change strategy is, then we don't have a realistic implementation plan to begin with because we have no idea how we're going to manage change and we have no idea how long it's going to take. We know that we can implement technology in X amount of time, but this isn't about implementing technology, it's about changing the business. So we've got to figure out what's the plan to change the business. And to do that, we need to know what the change impacts are and what the overall change strategy is. And then the last thing I'd say is leverage outside independent help. Yes, this is self-serving, I'll admit it, but whether it's third stage or anyone else, having someone that is not there to sell you software and not there to be biased to push you one direction over another is super important, because a lot of times these decisions get emotional. Decisions get made based on other factors that maybe are not business related. It may be that vendor's pressuring you, or vendor is giving you a huge discount if you sign this deal by the end of the quarter, or by the end of the year, end of the day, whatever it is. You'll get this huge discount. And a lot of times those emotional decisions lead to bad decisions. So having someone that can objectively challenge you, and again, we don't want to be total skeptics and total Debbie Downers, but we also don't want to be overly optimistic and create these unrealistic expectations for what a project is really going to look like, or what it's going to take to succeed. So that's what I've got for you today. I'll leave my contact information up there. Hopefully you know how to find me on YouTube, LinkedIn,